Well, now you got to really get the crystal ball out for this
Okay.
question. How has AI um, been involved in any sort of processes that have occurred in DCS at this point? Or if they haven't, do you guys foresee AI becoming a factor in how we look at some of this stuff?
I think one of the areas, if you look at the musical side of things, one of the areas where AI is already making an impact, and it's really interesting to imagine where this might be headed, is in the radio functions in the online streaming services, where they're able to analyze your listening patterns and make suggestions and play a track that you hadn't asked for, but is consistent with or generated by the tastes that you've shown in the past. And where that may take customers' listening habits. As Emran was saying, we've evolved from discs, which were basically just sort of digital recreations of LPs in many cases. So we've moved sort of away from the album towards streaming, which has kind of changed the listening paradigm from you listen to an album to you listen to a playlist. And a playlist can be composed of tracks from many different albums or many different sources. And now that's evolving from playlists to more content that's maybe curated by an AI algorithm. So I think that's one area that AI could impact our business.
Well, interesting. I mean, it sounds like it's part of the process and already, and where it goes from here. I think you would have to have a crystal ball to really kind of know how far that will go, but it does seem like it's part of the process. Well, we already kind of touched on this, but do we feel like there's a point that digital will be perfect, or are we there?
I would say that we're always in the relentless pursuit of improving and evolving. As DCS history will show, we're not one to rest on our laurels. We're always striving to do more, and our research and development team is hard at work now as we speak, working on ways in which that they can improve and exploit more performance out of this technology. So I would certainly not say that we're at the end, but as we've come to show, that the progress and the journey is worth it. Yeah, I'm more interested about what's around the next bend as opposed to where the end is. It's far more enjoyable to be able to have a view around the corner.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it, there's no musical signal that the digital encoding is not capable of capturing perfectly. In that sense, in a highly theoretical sense, it was perfect sound forever. That doesn't mean that we're making perfect products. So I think the frontiers that we're pushing back are in how to implement electronic circuits that more faithfully execute those digital encoding algorithms. And we've demonstrated most recently with the VRS, which was over 6 years of research and development to come up with a new platform that significantly outperformed the Vivaldi that was our previous flagship. And for anybody who's had the opportunity to hear them side by side, I think it's undeniable that we're implementing exactly the same digital principles, the same digital algorithms. We're just doing a better job of it.
Well, with that being said, what new developments occurred with the new VRS? New technological advancements and things like that we might see, in the future in other products, but mainly in the VRS at this point.
Oh, well, I mean, there was a lot. It was exciting. The innovations that were born out of the Varese project were several. And maybe we can each speak a little bit to some of these. One was the Actus interface. The Actus interface, which is a single interface that goes between each of the Varese components and allows them all to plug into the core, which is really kind of the master unit for the system. And that interface, you have to appreciate, replaced a whole slew of what would otherwise be a gaggle of AES cables, maybe BNC ended clock digital clock cables, communication link cables, to say just an example of a few. ACTIS is an acronym, thanks to our wonderful marketing team, that stands for Audio Control Timing Unified System. And so there's a lot that's going on there. We're passing audio asynchronously. We're passing control information that allows the various components to communicate with one another in a bidirectional way. You're talking about timing, so clocking information that is being transmitted in there, and then being able to allow that whole system to operate seamlessly, harmoniously together. That's a lot to ask of one single cable. And that interface was born out of necessity, because when we went to a mono DAC design, we then were forced to assess real world challenges like synchronization. How do we synchronize the two digital to analog converters and do so perfectly? And that is a word that we mentioned a little bit earlier, but we don't throw around a word perfectly very loosely. And so, but to synchronize those two digital to analog converters perfectly required us to develop a new timing protocol called Tomix, which Andrew could probably speak to. But the interface to allow for Tomix and allow for mono differential ring DACs, it was necessary. So ACTIS was born out of necessity. But the great thing is that innovation, that opens up the possibility for how ACTIS could be implemented, in the future, perhaps.
Yeah, well, instead of I know that we could have a whole video just on that new DAC. So, Andrew, maybe you could guide us down into some of the developments that it helped us create for the Lina.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I don't think so. We've got a Lina here. I can show you some of these innovations. So, as Emran was describing, ACTIS, which was something that we developed internally to address, the fundamental challenge of keeping the mono DAC synchronized, while also enabling a sort of step change in usability of the entire system, making it easier to set up and configure and manage the configurations. It is considerably easier, which is in the Varese, which is enabled by the ACTIS interface. So those were some of the internal innovations that we developed at dCS. Some of the other innovations came from our supply chain partners, and I can show a couple of them to you here. So this is a Lina Dac, and what may be hard to see from the camera, but the chassis plates that this is constructed from, these are milled from solid billets. In the previous generation of dCS products, the chassis were constructed with flat plates, either flat plates of aluminium or flat plates of this acoustic aluminium I mentioned earlier with the rubber layer in between. Our chassis supplier came to us and said, there's a much better way that you could make these chassis by milling them from solid billets, and that's what we see here. If I lift the board out, we can see that which looks like a folded flat sheet, this is actually milled from a solid block of aluminium.
Yeah, wow.
It starts out, that thick.
Yeah.
and then this is all machined out in that
Right,
process.
Yeah.
which adds a ton of rigidity rather than bending to mill it out in that way, but also adds a lot to the cost and material waste. And like, yeah, it's a way more involved process.
Yeah, definitely. So what it gives us, apart from the a fair bit of additional mechanical rigidity, it gives us something really important that's way more subtle, and that is that the chassis can be tailor made to receive the board that's going to be inside it. So if I reach down, bring up this base plate. Here you may be able to see there are little turrets that the transformer and this clip are mounted on. If you had a flat plate construction, these would be standoffs. That would be a little turret thing, a little detail. There'd be a bolt going through it, and there'd be a nut on the other end. So that's three little components that have to be added, and then there are four under the transformer, so that's three more in four different places, etc. What we're able to do with the milled construction is we can mill these standoffs into the chassis, and so the chassis is custom made to receive the components that are going to be put inside it. What that does is it considerably simplifies the assembly process, because we have far fewer components that we have to fit together. We can tap the turrets to receive a bolt, so there's no nut necessary. So we're eliminating discrete components from the chain. We actually took the opportunity to standardize the bolt sizes and the torque settings of the bolts, which means that the assembly process was radically simplified, and to the degree that the savings in man hours to assemble the product from the components that we receive from our suppliers, that saving more than offset the more expensive construction of the chassis itself. So it really, it has mechanical benefits in terms of vibration and resonance and things like that, but it's actually the ability to tailor make the chassis for assembly and for service, which creates savings which more than offset the cost of the superior part. So another innovation that came from our supply chain was the board that you see here in the Lina Dac. So if I hold that up for the cameras, that looks like 5 different boards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is in fact one circuit board. And what they've done is the solid substrate that forms the rigid part of the boards is etched away in these 4 axes, and the conductors, and these are 12-layer boards, so they have multiple layers of conductors inside them. These have been encased in a resin that's flexible, and so you get one board where each plane is completely continuous from here to here, from here to here, but the board becomes flexible, and you can get, I believe this is a 30 by 50 centimeter board, and we can fold that up and basically put it in a shoebox. So this gives us quite important electrical benefits, one of which is that any time you have a discontinuity in a circuit where you have 2 different materials meeting, you're going to get an impedance mismatch. If you do your job well, that's very, very small, but it's there. It's finite. And when you get an impedance mismatch, you get signal reflections, and that causes distortion and noise in the circuit. With the single circuit, the flex rigid boards, because we have continuous conductors on every plane all across the board, we have no impedance mismatches on the board. It's absolutely guaranteed continuous impedance on every one of those planes. Another thing is that with the packaging, if we have something that needs heating, if we have something that needs cooling, we can put that on a flexible piece of board and fold it up against a heat sink, which we can mill into the chassis, because we're milling the chassis out anyway. We can leave a thicker portion as a heat sink and then directly mount the component against that. So the flex rigid construction, it gives us electrical benefits. We have far fewer connectors internally within the product. Connectors are potential points of failure. A ribbon connector has little springs that clip onto pins. The springs fatigue, they lose their springiness, they lose their grip over time. You can get corrosion on the pins, you can get dirt and stuff, or they can maybe shake loose in transit and things like this. So we're able to eliminate multiple points of failure, from the circuit. We get packaging benefits. We can fold things up, we can hide things behind a shield, or we can fold things up against a heat sink and things like that. And the really cool thing is the way the flex rigid construction and the milled from solid chassis, the whole is almost like greater than the sum of the parts. These two techniques are sort of almost made for each other. And the result, as I say, is a product that is demonstrably superior. The single circuit construction is electrically superior to a modular board. The milled from solid construction is demonstrably superior to a flat plate construction, but the savings that we make in the assembly more than offset the additional cost of those superior parts. So that also enabled us to release this product at a price point that we wouldn't have been able to reach with the previous generation of technology. And both of these techniques were things that came out of the research and development projects that were running in support of the VRS program. And we wanted to test them because they come from our supply chain partners. We wanted to test how they would work for us in a commercial product, but we weren't ready to release VRS at that point. We were still working on the Actors interface and some of the other internal developments. And so the whole Lina project was an opportunity for us to test drive some of these innovations in a much simpler, much smaller and a product that we could release more quickly. So in several demonstrable respects, Lina is actually like a mini VRS. It was literally a test mule for some of the important technology innovations that finally came out in the VRS product.
All right. Well, guys, I can't thank you guys enough for coming in, but we've talked a whole lot about technology and advancements and what we're doing inside the box, to create the music. Let's finish on kind of a music note. So, do you guys have a, artist or type of music or song that has always resonated with you? And I will, start things off. For me, one of my mom's favorite songs was What a Wonderful World with Louis Armstrong. And so that song will forever hold a deep spot in my heart, and so it kind of established me as being I like crooners quite a bit, so those old singers and stuff. And that's just a type of music that I will always enjoy because, from my childhood and my mom and stuff. And then my dad was a 70s rocker and he believes music died in 1980. And so, I grew up with Led Zeppelin and all those guys. So there's two complete halves, but for me, those are genres that always will find their way back into my listening cycle. But where are you guys at with your artists or a song or genre? Andrew?
Yeah, so I think the music that I first got into was, I think music was born pretty much when your dad think it died. I think 1979 is one of the most amazing years in musical history. If you look back over the UK top 40 and you look at the number ones throughout the year 1979, I think there were 15 or 20 different number ones. They're all songs, that you still hear played today. It was just an amazing year for music. It was sort of early on in the whole punk sort of indie movement, electronic music was kicking off. So those were the first things I got into. I think what I listened to at university, which is music, that kind of will always kind of in some way define me, is I find the stuff you listen to at university in that age, span, is really fundamental. I discovered Prefab Sprout, which was one of the early UK indie bands. Listened to got really heavily into Stax soul. So that was a big influence on me. And then I'd say the other big influence was my father was deep into classical, less deeply into jazz, but those were things that I heard a lot back at home. And things I play a lot of classical nowadays, love opera. So yeah, not an easy answer, but any of the above.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No. As I guess is always the case, is the case. Everything that we do, all the technology, the innovations, everything that is that drives us is in service of music. It's a very interesting left brain approach to a very right brain dilemma, which is to connect authentically to the music that we love. And I think really what it comes down to is it's recapturing that experience, right? To go from merely listening to the music that we love to experiencing it. And I certainly had that moment when I was a young man, listening to my father's stereo on a early Sunday morning before heading off to church, and listening to Carrie Takanawa singing Ave Maria. And I remember the tears, falling as I experienced that magnificent track, and to realize that was all being done through a stereo was
Right.
amazing to me. Was amazing, and that catapulted me on a journey that I had no idea would take me to where I am in the industry, as a career. But it is always in chase of that experience. But whether it's Carrie Takanawa singing Ave Maria, or whether it's playing back Tool, Inoculum, Cullen Voices, or so many music scores that I fell in love with growing up, as my father was also introduced me to classical music, and then finding kind of the modern iteration of classical, which came in the form of movie scores. And so I loved Alan Silvestri and Thomas Newman and Hans Zimmer and others, and I loved that. But I think that it, just like Andrew, it's a difficult thing to pin down, and thankfully I think we all love music.
All right, guys. Well, I absolutely can't thank you guys enough for coming and doing this with us and being a part of Reference Analog and our store today. It's always thrilling having you guys come in, and we learn so much every time you come. And thank you for joining our audience today and helping
pleasure.
them get to experience some of whys and what's of dCS. So
Thank you.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having us.
absolutely. All right. Well, see you next time.
Bye, everyone.